Hey, Pepin.
Hum.
Whoa, what are you doing?
I am emulating the frequency of the universe. 443 hertz.
How did you find out that was the frequency of the universe?
A YouTube video.
Oh, is that where you get all of your enlightenment?
Well, essentially, I mean, it's just natural self-realization. I mean, you look into the abyss and you realize that you are the abyss, and the abyss is 443 hertz.
What'd you just call me?
Abyss?
Nate, we need to talk. Welcome back. So glad you guys could join us. I am here once again with my best friend, Nathan Pepin. How's it going today, Pepin?
Yo, I am doing well. How about you yourself, Meter?
I was doing great until you called me an abyss.
I mean, we're all the abyss, right?
No.
No? Oh.
See, you stare into the abyss and it stares back at you, not you are it.
Well, everything is connected, right? We're all one.
Okay. You're on some weird new age bullshit. So talk to me about your new anti-science methods.
So I think what really I'm trying to get across in a bad way is kind of the idea of enlightenment and kind of self-actualization. And there's definitely like a lot of like takes on that throughout history. Like this is a quote that I was kind of alluding to, and you kind of made more prolific there, which is, you stare into the abyss and the abyss stares back into you. Which was that Werner? It's not Werner Heisenberg. No, who was it? It was some famous philosopher, and he actually came up with that quote because he joined the war just to test his mental fortitude and try to find himself, essentially. And then that's the realization he came to. And then I think
Nietzsche.
I don't think that was Nietzsche. I think that was a guy that was inspired by Nietzsche.
Looking at it on Google.
Are you sure? Okay.
I trust brainyquote.com. Okay.
Actually, I think you're right, because Nietzsche said that this guy was inspired by Nietzsche and, went to the war to see if what Nietzsche said was right. And that guy, I think, is the same guy that came up with the theory that he came up with a mathematical formula to prove that you can't derive all mathematical formulas.
Why not?
It's complicated. I don't understand it myself, but really actually goes into like a Turing machine, because if you have a Turing machine, that Turing machine has to be able to reproduce a Turing machine itself and the anti-Turing machine. So it gets into like logical paradoxes, and eventually you conclude that you can't have a machine that can do everything.
But what does that mean for my self-actualization and enlightenment?
Well, the question is, can you actually self-actualize yourself? Is that something you're capable of? Is that something everyone's capable of? And what does it even mean?
That's a great question.
So from your perspective, when you've kind of seen the subject, what has been your thoughts on it?
On self-actualization?
Yeah, we could say self-actualization, enlightenment, anything like that, like kind of discovering yourself or seeing things for how they actually are.
I feel like it's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of like not being willing to accept that things are the way that they seem, and a lot of questioning. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Type of deal. But I don't know that it's impossible. I think people make it more difficult than it necessarily needs to be.
Mm-hmm. What would it mean to be fully self-realized, to be fully actualized?
Well, can we define that so I can answer that better?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's a good question, because I have my own take on that, and it's still a work in progress. But I first just love to hear like your side of that, because it kind of sounded like, to me, what your view of it was like life without the bullshit, right? Without the pretense. Mm-hmm. Like there's these things you tell yourself, but they're not true. There's like this reality that's there, but kind of what you're seeing is kind of the fiction around that reality, and kind of taking down that lens. That's kind of understood, but I want to get clarification before I assume that to be true.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this, this kind of not really uppity, but like, what's the word I'm thinking of when something's like kind of up its own ass? Like thought that in order to be enlightened, you need to understand that nothing matters. Like, it kind of feels like the idea that nothing matters, a lot of people say, is like the actual truth of the world. And that I think they take the staring into the abyss and it stares back to mean like there is a bunch of nothingness. And once you look at it, you realize that you are a part of that nothingness, and nothingness is looking at you as well. And I see it kind of as the opposite, where like in order to have a reason to be, you don't need to, like, I think like having a reason to be and to exist, and that, enlightenment of why you are or do in and of itself can be its own reason. I don't think you need to necessarily like have some sort of grander, massive macro scale view of what is my importance to something in an infinite distance away from me, but rather what is my importance to something extremely close to me. I think can matter just as much, if not more. Man, I just said a whole lot of nothing.
No,
Holy shit.
I think there's some stuff there.
I said a whole lot of no words.
Well, no, I think I got some of that. In a way, it's kind of not focusing on. It's the big thing to say there. It's not focusing on stuff that's super far away from you. It's kind of seeing what's there and kind of dealing with what's there, and not like dropping back the meaning to what things are right now.
I just feel like people are trying to look for too big of a meaning. And when they find a meaning, or when there's the possibility of a meaning, or when somebody else finds a meaning, they're like, yeah, but that's not real. And I just think that's reductive to a point that it makes, like, if, let's say there was, a meaning to life, would it be good enough for that type of person? I don't think it would. There's a Rick and Morty little throwaway joke where Rick builds this robot, and the robot's like, what is my meaning of life? What is the meaning of life? And he's like, it's for you to pass me the butter. And like that like blows its fucking mind. But like that's its reason for existing, is to do that task. And I think that if we understood, like, and if there was, first off, and if we understood the reason for our existence, would it satisfy us, or would it just leave us feeling more empty than the search in and of itself does? I think to some people, self-actualization is the search, not the discovery. And to some people, not searching is just as satisfying.
Yeah, I think a monk might say that searching and not searching are kind of the same, when you get to that kind of point where it's kind of about being in the moment at that point, and you're kind of living it as opposed to like, seeking it out. It's kind of just like one and the same. But to kind of go what you're saying there, I think you're definitely right in some aspects, and that's something I've thought of too, where you look at like this idea of a meaning of life, and you're always trying to look at something grand, something crazy, but maybe it's something that's much smaller. And would you be okay if it was something smaller? Like, if you look at yourself on a day-to-day basis, what are you actually doing? Like, I'm sleeping, I'm waking up, I'm showering, I'm brushing my teeth, I'm putting clothes on, I'm putting clothes away in the hamper. Sometimes I am making food, eating food, talking, being a little disgruntled from time to time. Every once in a while I'm driving. Like, a lot of the stuff I'm doing isn't really that exciting or that interesting. And then maybe every once in a while I do something that's like kind of, I get some greater value of, but in some sort of like grand scale, is that thing actually of such importance? Like, if I was to look at what I'm actually obtaining for that day, is that satisfying? And you could say that maybe it's not if you hold it to a high regard, but maybe holding anything to that kind of regard is kind of an issue.
I mean, I think if each thing you're doing, you're trying to say, does this provide me with self-actualization? I think that is a misstep in and of itself. Like, that's not, you'll never get, like, I feel like it's not a destination. It's like an in the moment, every second you have another opportunity to be in it, not to head towards it.
Okay, okay. It's kind of reminding me a little bit of I do like a lot of meditation. I mean, not as much recently, but I've kind of been in that sphere quite a bit, and there's a lot of conflicting theories on this sort of stuff. Like, people act as though like there's one kind of idea out there. There really isn't. And also, they're not necessarily like people will treat monks and kind of Buddhist people, or whatever, as like being an authority. And I think they have some authority. They have some sort of thing to say, but whether they are the ultimate source of authority, that's another matter in itself. But kind of what you're saying is kind of reminding me of this idea that maybe it's not self-actualization, but part of, or one purpose people have for meditating is to just simply be in the moment and to simply experience what's happening right now. Because what happens when we kind of go through our daily life is that we always get caught up in the future or some thought or something that's going on. And, that's, of course, fine to some degree, but it's like you're not actually experiencing the thing that's there. It's more like you're trying to like project your experience out when your experience is actually happening in. You're never experienced that in. Another way to see this, like maybe a better way to put it, or like a more like a relatable way to put it, is it's kind of like these people who will go to concerts and they start videoing like the concert, right? They're not actually like really enjoying the concert, but they're rather trying to take the video of it that nobody will ever watch because it's shit quality. Like there's kind of doing that, kind of watching this and trying to get that recording, and there's actually trying to actually take it in and kind of experience what is there. And if you experience things at that level where you're just in that very second, then kind of considering stuff beyond that isn't really that big of a thing. Of course, this doesn't mean you don't do things in that moment. Like maybe you eat, maybe you go throughout your day and plan stuff. You do things you would normally do, but it's in the context of what you're doing right now, and not in the context of what you would be doing later in that point.
I mean, I don't necessarily want to reduce somebody else's like ability to be in the moment to say like, if you're videoing something, it means you're not in the moment, because that may bring them more happiness and more connection to the moment to be videoing it. That may be how they want to experience that moment more than anything else. So I personally have never gotten behind when people are like, just be in the moment, man, put your phone away, because sometimes that is part of being in the moment, is or how they want to experience that. One of the bigger missteps that I see is when I thought about this a lot recently, actually, that I don't feel like when most people say like the purpose of life is to just maximize the amount of happiness you have. I don't subscribe to that at all. I don't think that is a good way to measure like the effectiveness or the enlightenment of a person's life.
Why don't you think it's a good measure?
Because I think it's selfish. And I personally am not on board with that, because what brings me happiness could be bringing other people pain, and I think that that's shitty. And I wouldn't subscribe to, well, if it makes you happy, that's what the whole purpose of life is, do it. But I see a lot of people say that, like that's the whole point of this thing, is like you want to maximize your happiness. And I just don't agree with that. I subscribe more to the idea of maximize, like push out as much good as possible, regardless of happiness.
And I would definitely agree with your criticism there because there's this idea, actually stems back from Greek philosophers of hedonism,
Hmm.
where essentially which actually, let's be clear, like the ancient Greek idea was a lot more nuanced than like it's made out nowadays. So
Yeah.
it didn't actually think that, but the basic modern day construct of that is like hedonist just lives for the moment, lives for the pleasure right this second. Like if something's not bringing them happiness right now, that's an issue. And to go back to this a little bit, you can see some of this with say phone addiction and kind of addictions with like social media. Like it's kind of very little wins here and there. And it's not to say all of it's bad, but there's these little spikes of dopamine that kind of like will influence you, and whether that's happiness or not, that's another question too. But it's not always that living for what makes you happy is good. Another instance here is like say alcohol, right? So or drug addiction. Like drugs can make people very very happy. They're kind of designed to do that, but is it sustainable? Is it good to be looking for that? Is that kind of the end? Like, it doesn't seem like it would be great in itself. Like, if I had some drug that this I can inject in me, making happy, God no, that sounds awful. Like, it kind of takes out any sort of agency of mine. And maybe for me, part of it is I would want to be a factor in creating my own happiness. And if there's not any sort of like a thing there, then what is it? The things are just happening to me. I feel like you disagreed a little bit with my phone argument there. Did you?
No.
No.
I
Okay.
mean, you. No. I mean, your truth is going to be yours versus mine. I'm. I guess my point is more along the lines of like happiness is a secondary to like what I would call, for lack of a better term, is good, good versus evil, and that good people need to continue to push out the good because good needs to continue to outweigh evil, and I firmly believe that it does. I talk to a lot of people who are like, the world's gotten so rotten, it's so evil now, things are terrible, there's more bad than good, and I cannot believe that is. I don't even think it's close right now.
I think there's a good argument, at least for what you're saying. There's some books on that, kind of studying it more empirically, but it's like things have gotten a lot better than they used to be. Like things used to be like very, very shitty. I mean, let's talk about like how there used to be these gangs that would go around, or we could call them like I don't know, like Genghis Khan and his cabal, or what it would be called, or other armies just go in, they destroy everything, kill all the men, rape all the women, take everyone else as slaves. Like this is some crazy fucked up shit. Like stories about how they would just pile bodies on top of bodies and have like picnics or whatever. So there's some really fucked up stuff that happened. Of course, there's stuff that happens like this in the modern day. Let's not excuse that, but I think things on average are a lot better than they used to be. Now, part of this, I think, is just the fact that we have so much more information. So when things that are bad that happens, we get alerted of it much easier. And also the fact of the matter is, too, that there are over 7 billion people on Earth. So the amount of bad that's possible to happen is just much more of a grand scale than if we had a population of, let's say, 100,000. Like, the greater the population you get, the more you're going to see, like, some crazy fucked up shit. And I don't think that's even necessarily a function of just, like, how bad the society is, but rather just how big the society is. You're going to see an increased quantity of those things. And it's let me go back to your other point here, too, where happiness isn't an end in itself. And I would definitely agree. I don't think happiness is an end to life at all. Like, that's kind of my perspective. Like, I don't know why you would live for an emotion per se. What you should live for exactly, I'm not sure. That's a question that kind of beneaths me. Not to put it in like a weird way, because this could be taken wrong, but I think a lot of times the reason why I live is because I don't want to die. Like that's not saying that if that wasn't the case, I'd kill myself or anything like that. But it's kind of like, this is how I kind of program. I'm programmed just to live. This is what I do. And what's the end in that? I don't know if there is an end. I'm just kind of doing what I'm doing. It's just kind of the machine just keeps going on.
So then what becomes the actualization for you?
So for me, I actually kind of take this from a different angle than you are in general, which I'm kind of taking more of it's a certain sect of like meditation practice where it's essentially like self-actualization is experiencing like your experience on a pure sensory level or kind of on a base level. So we have these perceptions, we have these sensations that are occurring to us, and what we're seeing is not actually what we're seeing. What's there is like it's a construction. It's not the thing in itself. A good example of this, and this might be a little abstract for people, but imagine you're looking at the moon, right? So imagine bright night sky out, looking at the moon, right? And when you look at the moon, you can kind of see how far it is away. You know, its clarity, its color. But think here for a second when you're looking at that moon, and start picturing the distance here, because you know that moon's super far away. Is it a mile away? No, it's like thousands and thousands of miles away. And just start picturing that distance between you and the moon, and just keep picturing and picturing, and you can kind of see that distance a little bit, right? But really, if you kind of think about it, like your brain doesn't have any concept of that distance. Like from your eyeball's perspective, that distance isn't there. That distance is being imposed upon that image, and you can actually just see the moon as it is right there. It's just there in your visual field, and there's no distance there. And then you can kind of look out and see there's no distance anywhere. Like distance is something we oppose upon the things we're seeing. It's a perception. It's a perception that's being informed by other perceptions, and there's so many different things like this where we have these experiences that they like we see them as something that is useful, that because distance is very useful, but is it really there in some sort of extent? And I think self-actualization is kind of the same sort of thing there. It's seeing the moon, realizing that distance is an illusion, but also kind of seeing that more personally with yourself. And with yourself, I could go a little bit in depth with this if you want, but kind of the self, is that really there? Or is that kind of an illusion? And what an illusion means is not necessarily that the self doesn't exist, because there is some self there. There's some kind of concept, but what is it exactly? Is it one unified thing? Is there a homunculus, some sort of soul kind of pulling these levers and all that kind of stuff? Or is it a collection of these different things that kind of interact in this way that cause this? Are these different parts that that are there that maybe aren't there in other like circumstances? It for me, it just gets really kind of confusing and really kind of interesting. And like what is you, the self? Like, for instance, emotions. A lot of people see emotions and they identify with their emotions, say, I'm angry, I'm this, right? But emotions are just another sensation. It's just like seeing something, and you're just kind of experiencing that thing. And if you have a certain emotion, be it happiness, sadness, fear, if you take a second and kind of perceive that emotion for what it is, you can actually just see it's not this thing, you're feeling, but rather you're feeling it in certain ways. There's certain sensations that are causing you to have that emotion. When you break it down, you can break it down into all of its components. And that's kind of seeing what the emotion for what it really is. And of course, that's kind of obvious in some respects, like fear, or let's say stress. When I get stressed, I feel the tension in my shoulders, my back. I kind of start closing my eyes a little bit, kind of squinting, whatever. There's all these different little symptoms there, and you can say there's that general emotion of stress, but are you treating stress for what it actually is? And for me, kind of part of that self-actualization is kind of breaking it down into its components. And that's a very long tirade, but I'll let you try to respond to that.
I just genuinely disagree with you. I get where you're getting at, but I think you're doing a disservice to a thing by breaking it down into its parts, because a thing is greater than the sum of its parts. Like it's a bigger thing. So you have all of these, physical attributes that make up fear and how you experience fear, but fear is something bigger than just those things. And when you put them together, it is a bigger thing than these things are by themselves.
So, do you? I'm trying to think of a response to that because I think my initial idea here is that what you're saying it's not necessarily incompatible with what I'm saying. And an example I have with this is think of like a computer, right? So a big part of understanding how computers work is kind of looking at, say, the physics of it, right? 'Cause computers are very based on physics, transistors, electrons bridging certain quantum mechanical gaps. They can go up to like another level of binary logic gates and that sort of stuff, and building up the components, RAM, CPUs, graphics processing units, and then you kind of get to like a basic operating system level, and you can kind of go beyond that to like a operating system, like kernel. Then you have the GUI, all these different things, all these different layers of abstractions, and all those are kind of based up on and built on like these layers is composed of, right? But am I gonna say that like you can break down, let's say, Counter Strike Go or some other sort of game you're playing into its constituent components and kind of understand how they operate and how they work? And I think there's a lot to be gained from that, but does that really mean you're not getting that much enjoyment out of it? Like, I don't think that's the case. I think they're compatible. I think your experience of the thing and understand the components of what it is, what's comprised of, they can be one and the same. There's no like separation here. It's not like you're not experiencing the joy from that game because you understand what its components are, or let's say it's sadness. It doesn't mean you don't feel sad. You're not dissociating from that, but rather you're kind of acknowledging what the thing is and experience it on a maybe 4 level.
I feel that it is reductive to the thing in and of itself to say it is a bunch of things, and that I feel like there's something intangible, something maybe indescribable that makes a thing bigger than just a list of things that it is.
Can you give me an example here?
I don't know. Can I? I feel like at any point you could say, any physical thing is, like a computer is a graphics card and a fan and blah, blah, blah. So it has these parts, right? And each of those parts has parts, and each of those parts has parts. And you can break it down to the point where you say everything in the universe is the same God particle, the tiniest little bit that we haven't even discovered yet, we don't even understand, just repeated indefinitely, infinitely.
Yep.
Everything is the tiniest God particle. I don't think that's true, though. I think it's more than just that. And I think to like break everything down is doing a disservice to the thing itself. And I think that saying, I get that you're saying that they don't have to be separate, that you can say it is a computer and it is also God particles, and part of being a computer is that it's God particles all put together, and that it's a fan, and that it can do this thing, and that all of those things do make up the thing. But I think when you take, a list of things about a thing and the thing, even if this list is complete, are different.
So let me try to repeat this back and see if I understand. So let's say you were to take something like, let's take sadness, right? Sadness is kind of hard to define, but we all know what it is, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you're a scientist and you try to take the constituents of sadness and you break it down to what it is, right? And then, this is kind of abstract here, but let's say you kind of break it down into like the chemicals, the neurology, all the stuff that happens, and you can kind of contain it all within this compendium of information here. And then you essentially have a recipe, right? So then theoretically, you could take that recipe, build it back up, and then you get sadness. What your argument is if you have that recipe, even if it accounts for all the factors there, when you build it back together, it's not the same thing. There's still something missing.
Yes.
Okay. That thing that is missing, where would you say that is missing from? I think would be my question.
Context.
Context?
The context and the generation of the thing in and of itself. So I feel like nothing comes from nothing. So in order for something to be born, in order for something to exist, it needs to be created of other things. And if that is, and I feel like it's bigger than just material. I feel like there is some sort of universal consciousness, for lack of any sort of a term, that creates, and that without that, the thing isn't the same as the thing. Artificial sadness is not the same as a naturally generated sadness. There is that difference between them in its generation.
I see. It could this thing, that collective consciousness or whatever it might be, could that be like equivocated to like a soul of some aspect or analogous?
A soul or a god, if you want to take some sort of a active approach, but I think it could be completely passive too, in, this begets this in a natural sense, in a way that a rock rolling down a hill is going to continue to go end over end, regardless. Like the motion has already been started, and the motion is in and of itself a part of the thing.
So is it lineage in some degree?
It in some degree, absolutely. I think, just like a person isn't, like, I am not just this physical thing and all of the parts, and you take the chemicals, even if you take my train of consciousness as it currently is, I am not that. I am also the past, and I am also the past. I am also, in a really perverse way, the future. Like, it is all of these things together that make the concept of me. And I think to just take it to its physical parts without taking its lineage, without taking inception, and its motion, I think is a disservice.
So I think you bring up an interesting point there, which is, especially with humans, like looking at a human and describing it, or kind of, it's hard to talk about a human without also describing their past, who they are right now, but also who they could be, right? And a lot of times we talk about people like, oh, they're a great person. Like, that doesn't just mean that they're great right this second, but also means they're great and they have the capacity to still be great in the future or do these things. Like, a person's often containing multiple tenses within their description or their kind of perception. And I think that is definitely true there. I think, I mean, I have one question I could ask here, but do you think that maybe self-discovery or realization would be kind of analyzing or seeing that part that can't be deconstructed, that part that's there regardless? Or am I grasping a straw there?
I don't know that it's graspable. I think there's an impossible, intangible, inconceivable nature to all things that makes it what it is. And I don't know that it's definable or capturable. I don't think you can bottle that specific, like, what, I don't think you can completely encapsulate anything. I think it's just impossible in and of itself.
Okay. Which was kind of funny because that kind of goes back to, I think, our initial topic discussion of like that mathematician. I mean, because I brought it up, the mathematician guy who came up with a theorem that you can't prove all things.
Right.
You can't prove all mathematical theorems or something like that. So that's kind of an aspect of that where I think there is an aspect of truth to that. Like, you can't fully know it because it might be something which is not knowable in itself. And I still have more a compatibilist kind of viewpoint, which is that you can break something down and build it back up. And essentially, when you build it back up, if you had like let's say just make a clone of it. Let's say you have some special god power and you just take like you as you are right now, create a clone, like there's no difference between you and that clone because the material, reality of those two situations are the same. Like you're going to behave the exact same way over here as you did over here. There's no difference there. Whereas your argument is more that there would be some difference there because there's an aspect of soul. It's just lack of a better word for what you're describing. But there's also something that can't be, like there's something that's not being accounted for in that material aspect.
Yeah, I mean, if you have me and a clone of me right here, like there is a difference between us because that's a clone. And that's part of it. Even if you can't like there is an in recreatable part of everything. Like you can't recreate something exactly because it will always be a recreation of another thing.
So that's kind of the context you're talking about, like where
Yeah.
there's always this thing with that context, with that lineage. I think we should definitely end this discussion here. That way we can break it up in two parts. Yeah, this is happening in post, but whatever. So, hey, next time on We Need to Talk, we have part 2 of our discussion on consciousness, mindfulness, self-actualization. I don't know, a lot of heady topics. So, hey, guys, next time, we need to talk.